interrupt the Mint Fresh Toothpaste musical review with this bulletin from the WPOD News Wire. Dateline, Chicago. Dwarf detective Billibob Baddins, after his first day investigating gangster Pretty Boy DeMaio's untimely death, turns up a mob hit of excessive force, two mystery men that hold sway over the Chicago police, and a DA's desk drawer locked with a low-level spell. His day concludes with a dinner interrupted by three hired guns, underworld muscle that work for Al Capone's rival, George Bugs Moran. And now you know the story so far. We return you to our regularly scheduled programming here on WPOD, Chicago.
Chapter 4. My Boy Benny. Sunday, I woke up exhausted. When your evening recreation includes roughing up a couple of Bugs Moran's boys at Mick's Diner, you tend not to sleep too well. All night long, I kept dreaming up possible outcomes from this case, all of them ending with me either taking a ride with Capone's boys or finding myself on the wrong end of Moran's guns. Even though I vaguely remember reassuring Mick that we had seen the last of those ogres, it didn't change the fact that being a dwarf in this city made you easy to find. To that end, I spent Chicago's agreed day of worship in the office, making sure that Beatrice, my hog leg, and any other weapons were all oiled, loaded, sharpened, and regripped. Even my old reliables from Acryonis would be ready for a fight. After last night, I wanted to leave nothing to chance. As I was dragging a sharpening stone across a hunting dagger at my desk, I found real comfort in this thought. Regardless of whether I was dealing with Capone's or Moran's boys, all of them were cream puffs compared to what I dealt with before in Acryonis. I don't care how big Sammy the Hammer Garibaldi is, he ain't got nothing on the scrappiest of orcs. This knowledge, partnered with the self-confidence one gains with a freshly sharpened battle axe and a loaded automatic, was giving me just enough peace of mind to get a little sleep while working this case. That is, if you define a good night's sleep as sleeping with one eye open and a battle axe under the pillow. Yeah, I know. You probably think it'd be smarter sleeping with a gun under the pillow. Well, I've heard talk about this fairy showing up when you leave a tooth there. Even though I know the odds of coming across a bona fide fairy in this world were about as likely as the Boston Braves winning the World Series, the last thing I wanted to give a fairy an opportunity to get its mitts on was a loaded .45 automatic. After another fitful night's sleep, it took a couple of chunks of ice in the sink and a few dozen splashes to the face to wake me up Monday morning. I called the office to let Miranda know I would be in later, around lunchtime. The morning was going to be spent out on the town, hitting the sidewalks and streets for a little shakedown of my connection in the Al Capone machine. Benny Roletto was your typical numbers runner, a high noble in a little corner of Al Capone's empire, who loved to throw his weight around. Talking to Benny for too long would have you believing that when the major decisions were made, he was there to whisper the final word to Capone, who would then give Benny the nod and repeat verbatim what had been whispered into his ear. In my world, Benny was no better than a tone-deaf bard whose stories continued to grow in height as he hopped from grove to grove. Thanks to some of those tall tales of his, Chicago's simple folk were terrified of his shadow and played Benny's lottery games without question. They had no clue that this dink consistently messed his trousers on the days Capone's boys collected from him. If his books were off even by the slightest, it would be a short-lived night on the town for Benny Roletto. Old Benny was hardly a general, but he made enough to live well. Still, as I've said before, money doesn't grant a goblin manners, etiquette, or class. Although Benny loved to play the part of the big man on Mulberry Street, his reputation of being a cheap bastard preceded him wherever he went. But Benny's arrogance and his miserly habits weren't nearly as insulting as his smarmy,
"Don't say Benny don't take care of his own,"
when leaving some sorry excuse for a tip. If there were any way he could have shined his own shoes without breaking a sweat, he would have. What a prick. Monday was Benny's primping day, when he begrudgingly surrendered some of his hard-earned gold to look the part of a big-time mobster. This usually meant he was hitting up dry cleaners, haggling for the cheapest rates to cover his even cheaper suits. Then it was off to get a shoe shine. But not just any shoe shine. No, he was going to find the most desperate nipper with the widest eyes and the most eager, "Shine your shoes, sir?" offer, and then completely ruin that kid's morning by monopolizing it for a few coppers. And sure enough, that's exactly where I found this skinflint in nobleman's clothing, leaning hard on a kid who was buffing his leather shoes. Benny saw me coming, but pretended not to as he turned his attention back to the shiner.
Oh, come on now, kid. These are the real thing. That's fine Italian leather you got there.
I smiled, catching the boy's doubtful look.
If anyone knew the real thing, it was this kid.
And this kid knew there were nothing real about this mook's thing. "Yes, sir," the boy huffed, his brow starting to bead up as he worked. "Benny," I called out. For a reply, he pulled out the newspaper from underneath his arm and opened it to the center. I wasn't fooled. Benny wasn't smart enough to read the funnies. "Benny, a moment of your time."
That's a mighty tall order, short stuff.
Benny sighed with a shake of his head and a shift of the toothpick between his lips. He was already turning the page, but his face was still as dim and blank as ever.
Dime is money. I don't know. I got places to go and things to do.
Looking down at his polished dogs, Benny nodded with approval. Yeah, like this kid who had sweated over these cheap shoes really lived for that. And flipped the boy a dime.
There you go, kid. Keep the change.
He smiled with a wink.
And don't say Benny don't take care of his own.
The shoe shine was 9 cents. "I need to talk to you about DeMaio." And that was as much as I managed to get out before he tucked the newspaper under his arm and started walking away.
And by the sudden vigor in his step, he needed to be somewhere.
DeMaio? I don't know.
He uttered over and over, as if he'd never heard it before. "I'm proud of you, Benny. You can speak and walk at the same time. Now, tell me what you've heard about Pretty Boy." This dink knew that long strides were the best way to make me work for information. I was doing just that because I was now downwind of him, catching whiffs of his sorry excuse for a cologne. A scent best described as 2-week-old dragon piss. By the fates, did he bathe in this stuff this morning? "Hey, look," I puffed, my short legs moving as wide as my girth would let me. "I don't think I'll be keeping you from any important date you've got. And I hate to have you sweat your scent off, so how about we stop and talk a bit about Tony DeMaio?" On every mention of his cohort's name, Benny's long, lanky legs widened their stride.
Sorry, short stuff. I can't help you there.
"Really?" I was now close to running in order to keep up with him. "Any reason why you're feeling tight-lipped today?"
Benny glanced over his shoulder, his eyes angled downward at me, struggling to keep up.
I could see the creases in the corner of his eyes and the slight rise in his cheeks. Son of a bitch was smiling. He was enjoying this, and he knew I probably couldn't keep this pace up for much longer. Sad thing is, he was probably right. If I had my familiar deerskin boots around my feet, he wouldn't have stood a prayer. But if I tried hoofing after Benny in these street loafers, I'd be looking at blisters larger than griffin eggs. When you want to grab Benny's attention, you compliment his taste in clothes, dames, and the finer things in life. Too bad he didn't know any of the finer things outside of an ace comb. "Hey, Benny, let me see those shoes of yours." That brought him to a halt. As I caught up with him, the idea of knocking that smug look off his face with a warhammer briefly took my mind off my aching feet. Another time, I thought to myself. Another time. Flashing me that salesman smile of his, Benny stuck out one of his loafers, proud as a peacock. I tell you, that shoeshine boy had a talent. He had given those imitations a gleam and polish that would have made the chalice of Tyrion look tarnished. I nodded approvingly. Nice. He was still sporting that wide, self-aggrandizing grin when I gave him a sudden push back into the alleyway. The garbage detail hadn't made it to this corner yet. So Benny wound up accessorizing his pinstripes with banana peels, rotten lettuce, and other garbage when he landed hard on his scrawny ass. While indulging in the more colorful vocab of this realm, Benny fumbled for something in his coat pocket. Maybe a switchblade, maybe a snub nose. I didn't know, and I didn't plan to wait and find out. I pushed hard against his chest, pinning him back against the alley's brick wall, and gave him a hard slap across the face for a chaser. Pipe down, Benny, or the shoes get it next. Yeah, I made sure that he fall without junking up the shoes. It was my bargaining chip in this little chat we were having. His swearing now dulled to a pathetic whimper as I pressed my fist harder against his chest, just itching for a reason to give him a quick punch to his ribs. Now, I'm gonna ask you one more time.
You pisshead! You goddamn run! My suit!
Oh, Benny has found some new bolts for his verbal crossbow. At this rate, I figured it was only a few more minutes before he started crying like a baby.
I'm gonna...
What, tell Capone? Now, why you want to do that, Benny? I stepped back, giving my thick red beard a few long, thoughtful strokes. If you did that, I guess I'd have to tell Big Al about your sticky fingers, wouldn't I? You think he'd be really concerned about a dwarf with a short temper when his numbers runner is skimming off the top? Now, this was something a lot of people suspected of Benny Roletto, but no one could really prove. I, however, was the one exception. It was on a divorce case a few months back in which a local business mogul was suspecting his young nubile wife of enjoying the nightlife a little too much. Naturally, he called on me and my talents of discretion to ferret out the truth. So I began following the wench to some of the livelier night spots of Chicago, where I discovered that one of her more frequent companions was Benny Roletto. He must have been quite the Don Juan, or Semirel Rubiar for the Acryonis crowd, able to fix a permanent smile on a woman's face and keep her breaths in quick, raspy moans. Either that, or he was one hell of a conversationalist. If the former was true, someone bury a short sword in my gut, please. At any rate, Roletto never hesitated to pick up the tab on their nights together, which always ended in the finest hotel suites of Chicago. Although my attention was still focused intensely on the princess and her casual trysts, I couldn't help but notice this numbers runner who was doing well for himself. Too well, the more I watched him. When I had collected enough dirty linen on the princess, I started watching Benny on my own dime, even sneaking a peek at his numbers book when he was schmoozing what I could only assume was his potential ticket to easy money. My personal quest revealed 2 sets of numbers in Benny's book. One set of numbers, payoffs and profits, was given to Capone's boys, and these numbers always added up. Never a dime or dollar missed.
All the cash was presented in neat little piles with a smiling and slightly sweaty Benny Roletto behind the transfer.
Then there was the second set of numbers, the actual numbers pulled in by Benny. Now sure, he wasn't all that impressive when you met him, and especially when you got to know him. He sure could sell the numbers game, though. When I first came across Benny pitching the numbers racket, I had to wonder if he was in possession of some charm or subliminal influencing spell. I was soon convinced it was his own kind of magic.
The con artist kind.
If anyone could sell brimstone to a rock dragon, Benny could. I was in no doubt that he was pulling in the cash, probably a lot more than the other numbers runners in his neck of Chicago. The detail, length, and ingenuity to which this weasel went to hide this mismanagement of funds would have impressed Griffinosian tax collectors. Because his fudging of the numbers remained consistently subtle enough for Capone and his seconds to not notice, Benny had a nice little windfall from his creative bookkeeping that allowed him to attract and entertain the upper crust of Chicago society. Win a prize such as the dowry of a Chicago princess, and he could retire from the business and remain set for several lifetimes. Yeah, Benny was still a dim-witted prick, but he was hardly stupid when it came to crunching the numbers and playing the con.
After collecting a goodly amount of evidence, so clear you would think it was a Lesria crystal,
I joined Benny one night over a cozy Italian dinner. Just the two of us. I knew I was going to catch him in a private moment because when I had dropped off some incriminating photos of the missus to my client about an hour beforehand, I could see it in my client's face that he and his sweet little wife were going to have an intimate sit-down about their future relationship. So instead of Benny's usual party with the princess, it was dinner with a dwarf, where we talked about our future relationship. He flipped the bill for this dwarf's lasagna and tiramisu, and even took care of the tip, while sweating up a storm at the evidence before him. Someone knew his dirty little secret, and it was going to cost him in detailed inside information about the organization for a good long while. Lately, Benny has been getting cocky, calling me short stuff, ignoring me from behind his newspaper, and otherwise not taking seriously the one dwarf who could guarantee him a permanent room at the 6 feet under flophouse.
Today was as good as any day to remind him why it was in his best interest to be good to me.
"You look mighty good in this brown pinstripe number of yours," I said with a grin while straightening his lapels. "Might want to make a note of that to your undertaker."
Screw you, Baddins.
Oh yeah, Benny had definitely creamed his Java with troll's piss this morning.
You know, someday that ain't gonna stop me from taking your head off. You just watch. Real soon, Big Al won't be the only boss people's gotta deal with.
Really? You think about taking over, Benny? Making Chicago your own? Now this I wanted to hear. Sure, he loved talking like a big shot, but Benny was usually smart enough to keep a bridle on that stag. Idle threats toward Big Al really didn't do much to lengthen one's lifetime. The streets not only had ears, but a mouth bigger than a sacred oracle. Looked like Benny was feeling his oats, and there had to be a good reason.
You never know, short stuff. Maybe one day, I'll be calling the shots from downtown.
You think you can take down Big Al?
Why not? He ain't so tough. Hides behind a lot of hired guns, but hey, he's not as tough as what he thinks. Maybe one day he was, when he was in the streets. But that was then. We're talking about the here and now, ain't we? And we're going to see a lot of changes in the here and now, Baddins.
The smell of rotting vegetables and overripe banana peels was beginning to overpower his cologne, which was an improvement if you ask me.
Standing again on his polished shoes, Benny kicked a freckled lettuce leaf in my direction.
It landed just shy of me, but you would have thought it had slapped me in the face by his smirk.
You might just have to find another set to get your inside scoop.
You sure talk like a man with a plan, Benny. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out my pipe, which was stuffed with a nice tobacco. Well, nice tobacco for Chicago. Never could find anything close to the good stuff from home, but hey, you make do, you know? I scratched a match against the rough brick of the building behind him. "I bet DeMaio had a plan too," I continued. "I wonder if you got better taste in dives than he does." Benny gave a slight huff, his mouth tight in disapproval.
Too bad for him he couldn't keep his yap shut. The mayor was too busy impressing the dames. All he had to do was keep quiet, and he'd...
That was when he caught himself. "What?" I asked politely, taking a few drags from my pipe while eyeballing him. Benny straightened his tie and scoffed.
What are you, deaf, small fry? Maybe you didn't hear me earlier, Baddins, so I'll put it in terms you might understand.
Before Benny could drop that 4-letter bomb, I gave him a swift punch in the balls. Who says there ain't advantages in being a dwarf in a human's world?
He was back on his knees, hands clutching his family jewels, face turning anger red with just a hint of painful pale, as the wind I knocked out of him emerged in a surprised, raspy groan.
My mother would have been so proud of her baby Billibob. The safety was off, and the hammer was back as I struck the tip of Beatrice's barrel against Benny's forehead, pushing him back up to face me. He was still dazed as I reached into his coat and tossed his Saturday night pistol back into the alley. The sound of the gun clanging against trash cans brought him back to the land of the living. Taking another deep drag from my pipe, I gave Benny the same winning smile that I used to flash to a goblin before taking his head. "Now listen up, you spineless twerp. You've been testing my waters today. I want to know why. This ain't like you, Benny. You've got the backbone of a Mactashian slug and about as much motivation. So you tell me what you and Anthony were cooking up, and I won't let Beatrice get in the last word."
Okay!
After he took a deep breath, still fighting back tears from my unexpected punch below his belt,
His voice came back.
Come on, Baddins, what's your beef?
"My beef," I snapped, poking him in the chest with my finger, "is that you're wasting my time. I'm on the clock here, and I don't like settling my arguments with Beatrice. Blood is a real bitch to clean out of the barrel. I can always get a new suit if your brains splatter on it, but I can't find another Beatrice. So you're not winning me over, and you're definitely not improving my mood."
Look, Baddins!
His hands were up in the air and shaking like a couple of leaves while I resumed my pipe puffing. Enjoying the weed kept me from laughing at the fact he was in no real danger.
This cretin wasn't worth the price of a bullet.
I wasn't supposed to know about the package. I was dropping off some numbers for Capone and happened to catch a couple of words between the boss and his generals.
I shook my head. Benny, you dumb mook. You really have a talent for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Go on. Benny stared at me for a moment, his jaw tightening. He really didn't like being talked down by a dwarf, and that's saying something, considering our height differences. But he liked it even less when I was right.
So,
He began again.
I heard him talking about this package.
A package? What was it? Booze shipment from up north? Opium? What?
Never heard what the package was exactly, just that he was hell-bent on getting it first. His boys were supposed to do a simple grab and run, but then the trinket disappeared. It wasn't where the boss was told it would be. I don't know why, but Capone was really laying into his boys.
And let me guess. Pretty Boy was one of them?
Well, yeah, Pretty Boy was there.
Benny started, but then his head tipped to one side, as if his own memory of events confounded him. Wouldn't be the first time this dink confused himself with his own facts.
See, here's the thing I couldn't follow. Pretty Boy was in the clear, standing on the boss's right side. You know, that whole right-handed God thing? It was like Pretty Boy was covered.
He nodded to me with a self-satisfied smile.
I could see past that. I was staring right at him. I could see in his face that he knew more than what he was telling Capone about the package.
Really? Well, ain't you the clever detective? I scoffed, wiping the smile off his face. I knew the point had been made that I really didn't feel like playing the banter game with him today. So I returned Beatrice back to her holster as I continued. So, you two saw one another, exchanged loving looks, and what then? He shrugged.
Yeah, we seen each other. I was on my way out of there, and Pretty Boy stopped me outside of Capone's place. He recognized me as one of his boys, you know? Anyways, we goes for a walk, see? A friendly walk.
Benny's face was always like one of those magical tomes, left open to perhaps the worst spell one could accidentally read out loud. He probably had made it clear to DeMaio he was seeing through him and his game with Capone. I couldn't imagine how hard Benny was pissing his pants during that walk.
Pretty Boy tells me that there's opportunity for the change in things. He wants to include me in this change. I mean, he knew I was loyal to him, that I'd done good for him.
Yeah, and you thought if Capone were no longer running the show, you could have a clean slate, right? Retire the creative bookkeeping, maybe enjoy a bigger piece of the pie with a new boss in charge. After all, I'm thinking you're tired of being the low man.
I am!
He barked. And in one of those rare moments, Benny looked sincere. He was looking for a promotion in the ranks, and it wasn't going to happen as long as Capone remained on the throne.
I shouldn't be the numbers guy. Yeah, I'm good at it, but I deserve better. I deserve the respect that those captains and generals gets. God damn it, I can do what they do, only better. Yeah, I'm smart, I am. If I can stick it to Capone, that shows I got the brains to be a general.
It shows you like tempting the fates, you stupid troll. I blew a puff of the rich, spicy tobacco into his face, narrowing my eyes on him. They scraped Pretty Boy off the remains of Sal's diner, and he was smart. Not smart enough to keep his plans low-key, though. I wonder if he was smart enough not to let your name slip. Benny's swollen pride deflated quickly, and he started to turn pale again. Taking another slow drag, I heard the crackle of weed in my bowl as he contemplated this. So how was this new order going to come about?
I don't know, but it had something to do with this package Capone was screaming about. DeMaio knew where it was, and it was me and Two Times who knew DeMaio had it.
Paulie Two Times Benetti was just another foot soldier in the service of King Scarface. My paths rarely crossed with Paulie's, but I'd heard of him. Two Times wasn't called Two Times because you couldn't trust him. It was some kind of nervous tic of his, a slight stammer that would make him repeat full names or sentences. I wouldn't have penciled in his name as one who would turn on Capone, but he did fit the mold of a follower.
The plan was to keep it on the move.
Benny continued.
Having me and Two Times passing from place to place, and then we'd recruit a couple of people to help us out. You know, so as no one would know where it is. First Paulie would get it, pass it to his people. Then I'd get a hold of it, pass it along, then back to Paulie. Nobody never knew who had it.
I raised a bushy eyebrow. And DeMaio trusted his yeoman blindly?
Me and Paulie were paid better than you'd think.
Benny huffed.
Better than my special bookkeeping.
Pretty Boy DeMaio could charm the chemise off a tavern wench with a wink and a smile. I already knew that.
Listening to Benny, it sounded as if Pretty Boy could also rally a platoon of tired and downtrodden soldiers against several regiments of hungry, bloodthirsty orcs. It was not that far of a reach to think that 2 times, especially if he was the same kind of follower that Benny was, had fallen under DeMayo's spell. 2 times had been found floating off the docks last week, dead from a severe case of lead poisoning to the back of his skull. At least a bullet is a faster death than an arrow. So a major player in the organization, and a couple of 2-bit hoods who couldn't find the shortest distance between 2 leagues with an enchanted roadmap, had been planning to overthrow the gangland boss of Chicago. And this overthrow had centered about a smash-and-grab job that went south, at least for Capone. Staying 1 step ahead of his lord and master, DeMayo kept this package on the move. Whatever this package was, DeMayo thought it was his ticket to the throne. You said Capone was raising a stench over this package, Benny. What can you tell me about it?
It don't matter.
He shook his head resolutely.
I don't know where it is. 2 times was the last one to have it.
Did this moron have wax in his ears? I didn't ask where it was. I asked what you knew about it. You ever see this trinket?
Nah, it was always in a long case.
He didn't seem to particularly care anymore if he spilled his guts to me now.
Felt like I was carrying a pool stick or something like that. This was a long case, but thin, you know?
So Capone was all up in arms and losing track of this package. Got a clue where it was supposed to be?
Look, I don't make it a habit to listen to other people talk, you know? That's rude. But Capone was yelling, so I couldn't help it. He kept yelling on and on about some museum and his connection there. Yelling about how the whole point of the whole job was due before some exhibit opened. Then he blew his stack that someone else got the package before he did.
Benny suddenly realized that he was still kneeling in garbage. He picked himself up, looking relieved when I backed away from him, out of arm's reach.
I don't know what the mayor was up to, but he was casing some oddball places. First, there was these museums that Capone kept talking about, so we were casing those places. But when I was supposed to meet the mayor to find out where the pickup would be, I wound up meeting him in a library. And this was where the job was supposed to happen. A goddamn library. I mean, what's so important in a library?
I could have given him an earful on that comment, but I knew my case would have fallen on deaf ears because my boy Benny had the brains of a troll. What was the point? If he did have anything in that skull of his, he would have been able to follow the hunch now forming in my head. When it came to a museum that doubled as a library, the search for where this heist of DeMayo's took place just narrowed by leaps and bounds. The momentary lull in the conversation brought us both back to Benny's imitation leather shoes, and him praying to God that I stayed happy and informed.
Are we done here, Dwarf?
Yeah, we're done here. I reached into my wallet and tossed a Lincoln at him. Get yourself cleaned up, Benny. You stink.